One of my favorite things to cook on a Monday is a pot of beans, which I know will set me up for success for the whole week. I know that I'll have a hearty and nourishing ingredient at the ready to compose all kinds of meals. In this video, I take you along on a week of meals that I prepared with the help of a pot of chickpeas. This is the way that I cook most of the time, very simply and intuitively, without strict recipes, and very much guided by the seasons. I'm using chickpeas here, but it can be any beans or even lentils, and I vary them quite a bit. I like to cook my beans from dry because they turn out tasting better than canned, they're cheaper, and there's less packaging waste when I get them in bulk. I soak the beans overnight, rinse them, and cook them in well-salted water with aromatics like onion and garlic, as well as kombu seaweed, which contributes flavor and makes the beans easier to digest. Different beans take different amounts of time to cook. I find that chickpeas usually take 1 to 2 hours. My favorite first meal to make with a freshly cooked pot of beans is brothy beans. The broth that they make is super flavorful and delicious, and well-cooked beans and their broth just make for the coziest meal. Sometimes I have them on their own, but on this day I decided to zhuzh them up a bit. I roasted a half of kabocha squash in olive oil with salt and pepper. Kabocha is such a flavorful winter squash, and its skin is edible, which makes it a breeze to cook. I then made a salsa verde, which is a very easy herb sauce that I make all the time. It doesn't really require a recipe. I just chop a bunch of tender herbs. This time I used parsley. I combined them with a grated clove of garlic, salt, and pepper. I then add about a teaspoon of vinegar and enough olive oil to achieve a chunky sauce consistency. The squash was ready. It's so good and sweet and comforting. I served the chickpeas in their broth with the squash and big dollops of salsa verde. On Tuesday, I made roasted vegetable rice bowls with tahini sauce. I had some broccoli, which I chopped into florets, and did the same with cauliflower. I added them to a parchment-covered baking sheet along with some olive oil, salt, and pepper. Put those in the oven. I like to roast at 425 F for extra caramelized results. Since the oven was already in use, I decided to roast some of the chickpeas to make crispy chickpeas for the bowls. Chickpeas are so good when roasted. I added some smoked paprika, cayenne pepper, and nutritional yeast, as well as salt, pepper, and oil. And I roasted them together with the veggies. They took around the same amount of time as the vegetables to get nice and crispy. I stirred the vegetables and chickpeas about halfway through the cooking for a more even color. This was about 20 minutes in, and I roasted everything for about 40 minutes total. Then I made some super simple tahini sauce. I usually eyeball the ingredients and add them to taste. This is a great base recipe that you can play around with endlessly. You can add spices, herbs, etc. to your liking. So I combined tahini, the juice of 1 lemon, a whole grated garlic clove, salt, and pepper. And then I added ice water to thin it out to a saucy consistency. Ice water is key. It makes the tahini glossy and creamy. Sometimes I also add maple syrup to balance the bitterness of the tahini. The roasted veggies and chickpeas were ready. The chickpeas are so good I could eat a whole tray of them in one sitting. To assemble the bowls, I started with some rice that I already had cooked and topped it with the cauliflower and broccoli, the crispy chickpeas, and the tahini sauce. The next day I had some of that roasted cauliflower and broccoli left over from the day before, so I made a creamy roasted vegetable soup, which is something that I make often with leftover roasted veg. I like to start my soups with a mirepoix or some of the ingredients of a mirepoix. Today it was just onion, parsnip in place of carrot, because that's what I had, and garlic. I heated the pot over medium heat, added olive oil, and sautéed the vegetables with salt and pepper. I also added some fresh thyme that I still have growing on my deck. Once the onion was translucent, I added the leftover veg, some of the chickpeas, and water to cover the contents of the pot by about a couple of inches. You could also totally use vegetable broth here. I seasoned everything with salt and brought it to a simmer, then let everything simmer for a few minutes for the flavors to melt, and then I just pureed the soup. This one turned out delightfully beige in color, but the color of the soup will of course depend on the roasted veg that you're using. The key with these creamy soups is to finish them with lots and lots of lemon or lime juice for a hit of freshness and acidity to contrast all the earthy flavors. I served the soup topped with fresh cracked pepper, olive oil, more thyme, and some of those crispy chickpeas left over from yesterday. On Thursday, I made chickpea salad tartines. I love making this kind of salad with either chickpeas or white beans. I finely diced the shallot and some capers. I juiced a lemon and added the lemon juice to the bowl with the chickpeas, then mashed the chickpeas. Added the shallot and capers along with pepper, salt, a dash of smoked paprika, chili flakes, and vegan mayo. Mixed it all together and it's done. The salad is so good in sandwiches, on tartines, or even in salads or lettuce wraps. I topped my tartines with arugula. Yum. On Fridays, I usually have the least amount of ingredients because Saturdays are my farmer's market day when I stock up. Oftentimes, I make pasta or soup with whatever vegetables I have left over. On this day, it was pasta with honey nut squash and chickpeas. I diced the squash, smashed some garlic, and started sauteing them in olive oil with the last of the chickpeas. salt, chili flakes, and rosemary. I also added some of my homemade preserved lemon paste, which I have a video on. This is a great ingredient to add for acidity and a bright citrusy flavor. I sauteed everything until the squash was soft, which took around 25 to 30 minutes. I cooked some pasta in the meantime. I used gluten-free pasta on that day, which is why it's darker in color. Reserved about half of the chickpeas and squash without any garlic. And then I mashed the rest, adding some of the pasta water to achieve a kind of creamy chickpea squash sauce of sorts. I also melted in some butter. I used Miyoko's butter, it's my absolute favorite. Strained the pasta and added it to the skillet. Mixed it with the sauce and added the reserved chickpeas and squash. And that's it. So delicious and very fall. This was my week of simple cooking with a pot of chickpeas. Hope you enjoyed it. Thanks so much for watching.